Perfectly Knotty. Let's talk about gauge. Take one. Hey guys, I'm so glad you're here. Have you ever finished knitting or crocheting a project and it doesn't turn out the size that you thought it was going to, that you were hoping it was going to? Maybe your square is more rectangular. Maybe the sweater, instead of fitting you, fits a toddler or your couch. Okay. Let's talk about that because the mystery here that we need to solve is mastering gauge. It- And so that sounds intimidating and it sounds scary, and a lot of people want to run for the hills, and a lot of people want to just avoid making anything that could potentially be a fail because it doesn't fit right, because we don't want to do the prep work to make sure that it works right. Guys, I'm Suzi Quillen. I'm the Empress of Yarn here at Perfectly Knotty. I am your stitching coach, and I am here to help knitters and crocheters like you make heirloom quality things by providing you with thoughtful and practical information and clear instructions and permission to experiment and try. So the core truth here is that gauge is a relationship. It's a dating period. Swatching is a dating period where you as the maker use your tools, your knitting needles and your crochet hooks and your yarn and your pattern to see if they come together to make the fabric that you want and need in order to make the thing that you want to make. That is the simple, most fundamental part of swatching. And that's what I want to encourage you to experience and explore. And I want to help you reframe your mindset around swatching. And we talked about that in the previous video about swatching mindsets. So if you haven't watched that one, go back and watch that. But today we're going to talk about the swatch itself and how we use that to help us learn something and create that information that we need so that we can feel more assured that we're going to get a result that we love. So let's get into it. I've got some notes over here because I have several points that I want to cover, and I want to make sure that I don't miss them because I get so excited talking about this stuff, and then I do things all out of order. Let's start by first talking about the information that is on your yarn label. Here is a very old, very worn out, really rather ratty yarn label. This one is for some Red Heart Super Saver because that's what I use when I'm teaching online, because I can stitch with it and pull it out and stitch and pull it out and stitch and pull it out. And so the yarn label clearly demonstrates that. Every label is going to look a little bit different. It's going to have the information for you in slightly different ways. And I'm going to see if I can put this down here on this screen over here below you. There we go. Now you can see that. Let's turn it this way so it's easier to read. There we go. Okay. So on this label, in addition to it telling you things about how much the skein weighs, what the yardage is, and things like that, what we're looking at for today is going to be around the things that relate to gauge and sizing. And that's going to be this tool right here, where this right here recommends a 5mm crochet hook or 5mm knitting needles if you're knitting, which is a size H, or a size 8 crochet hook, a size 8 knitting needle. And then it's going to have this little chart right here that tells you approximately what the manufacturer estimates the number of stitches that you would have in a 4-inch square, or a 10-inch by 10-inch, excuse me, a 10 centimeters by 10 centimeter square. This says that you should have approximately 15 stitches wide and 22 rows high if you were to use this size hook or needle. So there you go. Now, here's a fun fact, is that it's kind of a lie because this estimation by the manufacturer is based on a machine making things, and it's very based on a generic hand in making things. You are the unique deciding factor, and that is where swatching is important. Let me move this out of the way. Okay, let me get this out of the way. So I'm going to help you with some resourcefulness and teaching you some things to look for to understand and know your own gauge process so that you can work with the yarn label, the pattern, and what's actually happening for you. And why does this really matter? A lot of us are like, I don't swatch and I don't make things that need swatches and I'm not swatching and I'm just gonna go for it, which you can do. And in a lot of applications, that's totally fine. If I'm making a blanket, a scarf, something flat, a pot holder, a washcloth, something just flat and rectangular that doesn't need to be any particular specific size, that's going to be fine. If I am getting a fabric effect with my knitting needles or my crochet hook and the yarn that I like, if I like the fabric that's happening, hooray, that is the most important place to start. But if you want to make a garment that fits you correctly, you want a hat that actually stays on your head, doesn't come down here, isn't just sitting up here on the top of your head, you need to understand how gauge works. Whether you choose to swatch or not, that's a different part of the story, but understanding how gauge works is going to help you to make things be the size that you want them to be. Another really important aspect of gauge that a lot of people don't really factor in is that if you're following someone's pattern and they say they used this amount of yarn and their gauge was approximately this, well, if your gauge is looser, it's larger, you may end up needing a lot more yarn to finish your project. Or conversely, if your gauge is tighter, you're going to need a different amount of yarn to finish the project because your number of stitches and rows is going to be smaller than theirs. And in order to get it to be the overall finished size, you're going to need more stitches, which is going to take more yarn. So I don't want you to skip over this totally, okay? But once you understand how it works, it gives you liberty to work with. So the first thing that you need to do in order to understand how your gauge is working out is to be able to read your work. So we're going to start first with our knitting. This is plain stockinette. And if you remember in the previous swatching video, we talked about making your swatches larger than the 4-inch square. Okay, because it actually wants you to measure a 4-inch square, but you're going to notice right here, look how much this is curling here and here. And how much it curls under. Stockinette stitching does that. And if I were to pull this all the way out flat, you can see that it's much larger. But you want to be careful not to pull this because that's going to skew what your gauge is. You want it to be able to be in this relaxed state. So we're going to come over here and we're going to use my trusty dusty tape measure. We talked about this last time. Oops. Helps if I actually can get it. There we go. And I'm going to make sure that I uncoil that under there so I make sure that I'm getting this flat. I'm going to come across over here. I'm also going to uncoil it under here. I'm going to mark over here is the outside of my 4 inches. And over here, my 4 inches lands right here, right in the middle of this stitch. Well, let me look at this again. No, it actually lands in between these stitches. Okay. So we mentioned before that with your knitting, when you follow, let's get the trusty pointer out. When you follow your stitches down from the loop that they are made on, the point of the V going down, that's how you know you're on the column of the stitch. If the point of the V is going up, you are in between the rows. And you might have, in a measurement, you might be in between, in the middle of a stitch. So that's going to count as a half of a stitch. Now, let's count between these markers how many stitches wide I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I think I counted that right. I might have missed something. I think I blinked. Sorry. But that's what we're looking for. That's your stitch width. In a lot of things, stitch width tends to be the most crucial, but not always. Let's take a look at our crochet swatch over here. So, and if these are single crochets, and this right here is in between the stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and put a pin here in between these stitches. I'm going to measure over 4 inches. I want to try to stay on the same row, and that puts me in between these stitches right here. It is really important. If I don't know where a stitch stops and starts, how am I going to know how many stitches wide it is? Okay, so this is what you're measuring, and you see I have all this margin in both of these. I have margin on either side. Let's look at it from the perspective of looking at our rows. So here is this row right here. You want to measure from the top of the row down, and you're going to end at the bottom of a row. So in this crochet sample, let's just say we're going to start here. I really didn't make this sample quite as many rows as it would have been helpful, because I actually come down right to the bottom right here. It takes practice to learn how to read your gauge. It absolutely does. The more you do it, the easier that it gets. Oh, and there you go. So make things, make those washcloths, make those pot holders, make those Afghan blocks to make your patchwork thing. Just do it in practice, because that way you can see and you're starting to learn the architecture of your stitches, which is really, really important. If you pause, we're going to pause for a moment. I'm going to come into this. Oh, no. And there we go. We're going to do that so I can speak to you directly. So you're going to learn to read your fabric. And that also means when you're making your stitches that you're paying attention to the movement that it takes to make them. So you're understanding what makes the stitch look like the stitch that you're making. With crochet, we have singles and doubles, and we might have chains and open spaces. In knitting, you've got your knits and your purls, and you might have some yarn overs that make open spaces. That is so helpful to understand, and it allows you to learn how to read your work more clearly. When we're talking about row height, we talked in tension about how if your row height isn't matching what the gauge requirement is, there's some adjustments that you can make in your ergonomics quite often that are going to help you have choice and control over that. But that really affects the length of your project overall, which if you're making a scarf or a blanket may or may not be as impactful, but if you're making a sweater sleeve, it's really quite impactful. So take all of this with that understanding that it all depends, right? It all just depends. But the more that you know and the more that you understand, the more in charge you are of those choices, and it's not happening to you, you're choosing it. So here are some thoughts here. Do I always swatch? I do not. I absolutely do not always swatch. And the reason that I don't always swatch is because there are certain yarns that I use a lot, and I already know and understand how I create fabric with that yarn. But if I'm making something completely different, if I'm using a different kind of yarn, I'm at least at the minimum going to do a swatch to make sure that the fabric that I am creating is the fabric that I want. And that way, I'm not guessing and I'm not waiting until I'm halfway into a large project and starting over. Is this foolproof? Absolutely not. Because I have measured things and gotten gauge and then on a 6 or 8 inch swatch and then have come in further along in a project and have it be not the right size. And some of that, and then it becomes a process of understanding how and why. Some of that, if it's pulling in for me, often is because I've chosen a yarn that has nylon in it, and the nylon inherently brings that in. Or maybe I'm using something that has linen in it, and linen allows things to relax and become a little bit softer in their structure. There's a lot of trial and error in this, and it is not a waste of time, and it is not a waste of yarn. You have earned the right to choose your stitching, but I also want you to choose and not have it happen to you. If you have scrap yarn, little balls of yarn that are, and maybe there's similar things that you use that type of thing rather regularly, I really, again, want to encourage you to just keep practicing and making random things to just test. Make a thing, measure it to see if you can, because the more you understand and the more that you know, the more empowered you are. And then you do not have to stay stuck in these little boxes where you only make things that are rectangles. I don't want that for you. I want you to have the tools that you need to be able to make anything. Now, if you choose to still make things that are rectangles, that's awesome. Do it. Be happy. Stitch and be happy, okay? But I want you to do it because you're choosing it, not because you don't know how. There you go. All right. Let me take a look at my notes here. Went off on a little rant there. Sorry, you guys. All right. So let's recap a little bit. The yarn label is a guide. It's not the law. The pattern gauge is what your goal is, and it gives you information. All of that is just information. I want you to learn how to identify your stitches and be able to count your stitches inside your work, reading your work. Gauge matters for fit, and it also matters for how much yarn it takes to make a thing. That matters too. Don't forget, you can also, if you're close in your gauge and you're trying to make gauge, sometimes it's interesting to do that just as an experiment. Can I make this happen? And what would it take? Again, let's go back to that concept I've brought up several times in other videos of making something that's inconsequential. Make a scarf, make a pot holder, make an Afghan square, and change what you're doing in it. Change your hook, change your needle, change the way you're holding things to see the impact that it has on your fabric. So here is my challenge for you, is to try, to practice something, to experiment with it. And I promise you that the more that you do that, the more that you're going to elevate your skills. Even if you choose to continue making the kinds of things that you're making, your skill level is going to improve every single time you make a thing, because you are adding information to the database in your mind that carries all of that. And if you really want to be technical about it, you can make these swatches and make notes about all the things, and you can put them in a notebook and have them to refer back to. There you go. So that's what I have for you today. You guys, I'm Suzi Quillen. I'm the Empress of Yarn here at Perfectly Knotty. I'm your stitching coach. I'm on a mission to empower you to explore your stitching and do it intentionally so that you're building your skill level so that you are empowered to create out of whatever you want to create. If you would love some more conversation about this to get cheered on, I would really, really love to have you come and join the Stitchery Journey community over on School. Down in the description, you will find a link to get your invitation to come and join this community. It's so fun. We're having good conversations. I'm going to have more classes, and even like this class will be in there, but it's going to have some more supporting materials that I can't provide here in this platform. So come and join us over there. You'll love it. It's so fun. There's no ads. It's not distracting, which I really like. I would love to see you there. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all those YouTubey things. And I'll see you next time.